question also, Dan. You were mentioning the, maybe including some provision in the rental agreement, and I was hearing that for town hall. Did you also mean that also for tenants' leases at the Penn Place?
Yes.
Okay.
And food trucks, you said, too.
I would say yes.
We don't have food trucks here.
Oh, he
but
said-
if
he
we
said
could
food
get-
trucks.
I heard him, but if we could get food trucks here, that'd be good. Thanks.
We do get food trucks there.
Okay, Mario.
I would just say, town council, please don't get caught up in enforcement. Right. Okay? Get caught up in the overarching concept of that we can take the lead as something that's really important. And I can tell you as a resident of this town and kids, the teenagers now, they've embraced the concept. And it's very easy. And I think that careful at elementary and middle school, I think can embrace it. It's something that little kids can get behind is the future generations of this town and society. So please don't get caught up in enforcement. If you can save, if you collect $50, great. If not, who cares? It's about taking a position on something that's important that everyone can get behind, unless you actually manufacture stores.
And cost neutral is an important statement to make.
And I just want to say, first of all, congratulations on your new position. And I would fully support this initiative. I'm not speaking on behalf of the CA, such as a resident, and I think that this is great. And somebody had to, bring this up. I mean, in my house, we don't use plastic straws, we stainless steel, and now we'll use some of the glass straws. And I think it's, a first step towards making a larger change and a larger impact. But I think it's excellent. And, I would suggest from the CA's perspective, if it might help get the message out broadly. Because, the CA also, in addition to fun events, we also do educational type events whenever there's a good topic of interest. And I would suggest perhaps Dan and Jane, both of you if you might consider sometime next year, coming up with a presentation on one Wednesday evening. And it doesn't have to be, super detailed, but I think, okay, not trying to be funny, but sometimes pictures, it just helps with the joke as well.
Sure.
Oh, there's lots of pictures.
Yeah, and they're horrendous pictures. People see on Facebook that turtle picture. The first time I saw it, I was, imprinted in my brain.
Right, really, it does. We also have a Girl Scout leader here who have sometimes done really good presentations on things like that. So we have a lot of scouting meetings that take place here in the town hall. So the scouts could also pick up on this and do some training and sign on. I want to piggyback on this though, because I agree, support it wholeheartedly. I think it's great. It'll be interesting to see what happens with people who are renting town hall. About 2 weeks ago, an email crossed my computer about whether we as a town would be willing to support a day of racial healing in Montgomery County, which I, as the mother of a multiracial child, thought was pretty great, in addition to my having a multiracial child. Great, and I wonder if that's something that the council would also be willing to support. It doesn't seem beyond the realm of the mayor protesting guns or our, as a town, being a nuclear-free zone or a straw-free town. So.
Do you have a flyer? Did they send you sort of a thing?
They actually,
Is it
is it a
I
proclamation?
think it's a proclamation, yes.
So, I like the idea very much, and I'm trying to remember the Day of Healing is later in January. It's not early, if I remember it. And the reason I'm bringing this up, Elizabeth, is because just in respect of time tonight, and this is a new business item
Right,
that's
I understand.
not on the agenda.
Yeah, parking lot item.
Parking lot item, there you go, thank you.
I'd like to put a parking lot item out there too, and that is to try and be careful about how many of these things that we endorse. I mean, we could spend hours, because I'm sure, while every cause is very noble, and I'm not suggesting by any sense that any of these things should be shot down, but at what point do we find ourselves endorsing dozens or hundreds of things when people come up, I mean, saving all sorts of things or not doing things? I mean, they're all perfectly noble causes. I'm not trying to throw a wet blanket, but I'm trying to say is that let's be a little careful, because there could even come a point at which we could possibly anger citizens depending on what side of a particular topic we pick, or we could even have citizens opposing things, some of which we will have little or no influence over. And I'm not suggesting that we shoot down either one of these, but I'm just saying that we just need to be a little careful, and let's think about them a little bit ahead of time so that we don't find ourselves in the bind where we're either up against competing proposals for something good, or that we are endorsing a proclamation or two every time we sit down. Again, they're all very good things. There's nothing wrong with them. I don't have a big problem with it. I just want to make sure that we don't end up with a big scope creep here. That's all I'm really trying to point out.
And it's come up before, as you know, and because of that, we've just decided, at least in my time on the council, we've just taken the position that we don't entertain any of those, because where do you draw the line and how do you pick? And the reality is, you can't pick.
Right, I agree with you, and I was been sitting with you, and the same thing, and we kind of had, yeah.
Steph?
Just wanted to say about the straw, so I do have 2 kids, an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, and it took them about a second to get on board with the straw thing. So I think that the kids are already on board, and they already have it in their schools and stuff, but for the town, we do have the 4th of July as an annual event. And so there's opportunities where we have townspeople together where that could just be part of the celebration, where there's just something in there. And just, there's 2 things. One is, my kids went almost anti-straw like 5 years ago or 3 years ago, simply because there was a STEM event, and there was nothing about straws there, but they were given a stainless steel straw. And that was it. Nobody even said anything about straws. All they wanted to do was use that stainless steel straw from then on in. And so it could just be as simple as you're giving people stainless steel straws, and then magically people are using those instead of anything else. And then just as a side note, if you're doing all of these initiatives, speaking as a parent, the juice box industry is really your target.
Yes, I was going to bring that one up too.
Less straws.
Okay, there was somebody else.
Yeah.
And I just want to, if I might, just want to bring back the focus of time. We are running kind of late, so see what we can do here.
2 hours with comments. No, I just say you're elected to pick. Don't cop it out on we can't pick because there's too much stuff. And where we voted you all in to help us pick and make choices, and we trust you all to make choices, and if you make choices that are controversial, well, welcome to your part.
Exactly.
We're electing you on it.
That's the risk we take,
Don't sit on the sideline.
getting up on this table.
It's too easy.
As long as you all know that. Yeah.
Can I just say one
Okay.
last thing?
Yeah.
Just to Phil's point, and I think it's a good point. However, the straw initiative is not something new that people have never heard of. I think we've all been hearing about it in DC already, and news so much, that it's not going to be like completely out of the blue. That I think it's, I mean, most people here are always hearing about this thing. So just trying to implement it more in their part. We may not necessarily, see that as much resistance, perhaps maybe in parking lines, but I don't know. So I'm definitely seeing that.
We came together to be a nuclear-free zone. We can come together to be a single-use.
We can put a straw-free zone underneath our nuclear-free zone sign.
I'll take it aside.
There we go.
Nice.
Yes. I'm sure this is
People throw their straws out on the way.
Well, typically, if, understanding where council may be and residents, you draw up an ordinance, a draft ordinance, circulate it for review, then for introduction, Now, it doesn't have to be, well, it doesn't have to be an ordinance.
Just gonna say, it doesn't have to be
Could
an
a
ordinance.
resolution? Jane, you get a sense on that? Because we don't have anything in the ordinance that we're actually changing with regard to this, right? So,
Well, if we were to add a new ordinance, we'd have to
well,
go
sure,
through
if you want to make
the
this an ordinance,
two-step.
that's the process, right? Draft ordinance, then it goes up for introduction, one meeting, another meeting, it goes for approval. Resolutions don't require a two-council meeting, they just require the one. You can introduce it and vote on it in the same meeting.
But it then becomes a question of how it becomes legally effective and of interest. We do have a chapter on health and sanitation, including, oh my gosh, this is longer than one might think. We have an ordinance against littering. We have ordinance about solid waste, and we have sanitary regulations, so there might be a place for it, you know, that would logically fit, as opposed to like a new title, single-use plastic straws, you know, single ordinance. So I think if we wanted to make it something, especially that would be binding on the town, tenants, you know, rental people, that it needs to have some kind of force of law, and we don't right now have like a giant, you know, set of regulations. I mean, we've done it in a couple places. Like most recently, we took the traffic and, or I should say the parking ordinances and said, okay, here's a general ordinance that is much more broad, and then town manager do regulations under that that's specific. But that's not a model we've generally followed, so we don't have a whole bunch of regulations where that could shoehorn into. So I think, you know, we could discuss what would make the most sense in terms of where it goes and how it goes.
Okay, we are going to have to end quickly. Is there a quick question,
I
Charlie?
just want to say something, that the archives of all of our ordinances and all of the other stuff, if you want to help on this, come into the archives and we can give you all the help and all the information you need to formulate your proposal.
Let's, if there's no more discussion there, let's move on to town updates. I'm first on the list. It's update on the Safe Routes to School project, section 106 review. As you all know, the former town manager and I were feverishly trying to put together a catalog of documentation for the administrative record as directed by the Federal Highway Administration. While it started towards the end of September, we continued to get changes in guidance and, direction. So ultimately, though, it came down to where, we just had to submit what was already written, anything that had been produced in writing that was in response to any consulting parties' concerns or comments. So that's the matrix you may have also heard about. I've written about it a few times in letters from the mayor, as well as in updates to town residents. So that is what we put together. We also were given some flexibility in using the letter that the former mayor had sent to the Maryland Historic Trust in response to the trust's recommendations for the 106 review. So that letter that was sent by the former mayor addressed a lot of the comments, where there were some specific comments, one-on-one, or a concern that was very specific by a person that didn't get a response. We either, I jumped ahead. It either had a response, and we noted that for the record, or it didn't have a response, and it was just noted as none. So that went in last Monday. I was hoping I'd hear something back from Federal Highway. I haven't yet. Our understanding is that they have basically till November 17th, December 17th, to complete whatever their review is, because it isn't just the paperwork that came from our town. They're doing their compliance check across other federal agencies that have been involved in this 106 review. And so they are supposed to finish that up by the 17th, because the person goes on vacation until like the second week of January. And I'm hoping that they will have submitted whatever response that they need to complete and send forward to the consulting parties by that time. We are very, very close to the point of advertising for bids for the construction work of the Safe Routes to School sidewalks. We are waiting for one more memorandum of understanding from State Highway on an 80-20 shared grant. You've all heard me discuss that before. We get that, and we should be able to move forward. And what we wait on officially is the federal authorization to advertise for bid. And so we get the memorandum of understanding to ensure the additional funding is available for us under the 80-20 split, and then they issue a federal authorization to proceed. So we're really almost right there. I'm really hopeful that we're right there, and I'm hopeful that consulting parties are not going to continue to disagree, and that we can all move forward together as a town and complete this project. It's just one of those things, you know, you may not get everything you want. You got to be able to live with one another. And we know we do. We live together, we socialize, we work together, we play together. Just we need to come together on this and keep moving forward. That's all I have for that.
Well, I was going to mention that I was, and I talked to several others on the council, who were disappointed by the way the council was not included in distribution of the recommendation that went, of the response that went back to the Federal Highway Administration, and that the council didn't have a chance to make comments on that before it went. And for some council members, it was a case that they haven't seen a document until today. And I'd like to hope that we could do better than that in the future, that when we make commitments to the council to provide information that goes and sends out representing what we as a town government submitting, we'd like to know what it is. And I think the council has a major obligation, a major responsibility to be involved in saying, yes, this complies with what we understand we need, or no, we don't. But I don't think that happened this time, and again, it falls into the category of, I think there needs to be greater awareness of the role that council must play and has an obligation to play, so that we can have input and say, and be involved in the process, and not find ourselves with getting a proposal that's been made, that's fait accompli, or a finding that's fait accompli without our involvement.
So it is not our finding, Hans, and I'm going to go back on record for what everybody has heard me say. Initially, this process was going to be much more inclusive with all council members. In fact, I originally sent out all the consulting party memos divvied up across council members. Nothing was done, and we were getting closer and closer where we needed to start moving. The next thing I know, the previous town manager had said that I was actually proposing even bringing in a temp to just get it done so we could all look at it. Getting it done also was to include record of all verbal communication. So two things happened here. Then one was the former town manager said, oh no, that he and staff would take care of this. It wasn't what I expected, but that's what happened there. The second thing was we were told that we could not document for the administrative record any verbal communication. Had we been able to do that, Hans, I can assure you, you all would have been able to be involved, just as all consulting parties would have been able to be involved, because it was going to become more of notes for the record, notes for the file, expressions of opinion, expressions of belief, expressions of philosophy, and again, notes or record of verbal. We were explicitly told by Federal Highway and State Highway not to do that. And that came up near the end, after staff were already compiling information. A third point to make is that this was truly an administrative function. So in the end, when I realized that, one, we weren't going to have time, I was working, shall I repeat for everybody's benefit, not this past weekend, but the weekend before when it was due. We were given a hard deadline of Friday. Well, I didn't get the information to review until later Friday. And then I worked till Saturday morning at 3 a.m. I worked Sunday morning until 5 a.m. in the morning. And I worked Monday morning until 9 a.m. And I have somebody sitting right here who was helping with a lot of that for me. Believe me, this could have been done differently, but this is how it went. It wasn't meant to, not involve any of you. Had it been able to go differently, I'm sure it would have happened. But just as a final line to mention, this was an administrative function that came to me and Jean to put together. We did not have to involve council members. I wanted to, but we just didn't get that way. Everything kept shifting. It was a voluminous amount of work, as you can tell by what I put in just the weekend before. So it wasn't on purpose.
I just wish we would have known it. I mean, I thank you for all the work on it, but I think it was 2 meetings ago, and then maybe the last meeting too, we asked to see it just before it went through.
We didn't
never
have
got it.
anything. Stephen, you made a call to me
Yeah.
the weekend of last,
Mhm.
and I said I was still finishing it. I'd
Yeah, I
only
remember
got
you
it
saying,
Friday
yeah.
night.
Yeah, which is
So,
understandable, but
you know.
but on one hand, we're hearing they're asking for something super simple, then we're hearing how laborious it is. It
simple.
just doesn't matter. It
wasn't
doesn't sound
simple.
like
We
it
had
when
to
you're
go through all
describing
the
it.
files,
But,
and we were pulling paper. We had to find out whether
Yeah.
we responded or not.
but just, it would have been nice to just know more about why.
Imagine
And,
how difficult this was.
wow.
Would you say so, Dennis? How difficult it was? I even had Dennis help me.
Very tedious task.
It was
Yeah.
incredible.
It looks tedious, and,
Nothing to do but spend time.
yeah, I appreciate the effort, but I just wish we'd known, like, there's, a good reason for it. It's just kind of,
Well,
we were told we would get something, and
if
then we never
everybody
did.
had actually done their own parts, which is when
Yeah.
I first sent this stuff out in the end of September.
Yeah, and it just
have-
started, and
but
then
no-
later we got a
nobody-
message saying, don't do it anymore, it's going to change.
Well, it was out there for a few weeks because I remembered checking and saying, have we heard from anybody yet? And I was
Yeah.
told no. And I said, maybe this is too heavy a lift. Let's get a temp to come in and just do it
Yeah.
and then distribute it.
Yeah.
That was taken out of my hands. So
I mean, I don't mind all that, but I just wish we would know more why we didn't get something when it was agreed we would get a draft of things, and I understand now that it was running up to the deadline, and then it just reminded me of when the letter went to MHT last year. There was no involvement of council, or at least not with me, and the Historic Preservation Committee was really not happy with, and especially myself, not happy with some of the things that were in it. Like, so it's the same thing. It was just kind of like council was left out of things that go off to the state, and
this wasn't
I think there's a
really
limit of how much.
This wasn't a council decision. It wasn't meant for a council vote. you know, it would have been nice for you to be able to have some review and make some comment, but it wasn't really up to you to be able to do that, actually. And we're still waiting. Maybe there'll be something else that'll come back, and I can still say, listen, this is what they want next, so you all see it.
Yeah, I wasn't intending to make comment, and the reason why we had at the August meeting, we had a stipulation that the council was saying that, like, I was asking to be involved, and Hans was asked to be involved in things. We haven't really been involved in anything since early August. We haven't been invited to anything.
As I explained to you, you know that. I sent you an email with that specifically. You asked about it, I told you.
I haven't been invited
had
to-
We haven't had calls.
So how did you find out about what the
This is the
FHWA and
106
SHA want?
review. It wasn't about
Yeah, but how did you
SLTS.
know what they were looking for? That was my whole point, was I wanted to be there to be a witness to what they were saying. If you were misinterpreting what they were saying, then I could have helped with that, but was left out.
I wanted to be a witness on the appointment of the other council member. Let's not go into that now. Thank
Okay.
you. I think we've had enough discussion on this. Okay?
Well, so what Hans, well, actually, I'm not ready to move on. What Hans sent around is what apparently Jean, with Hans's input, had worked up. And, you know, obviously, you and I had a discussion on the Sunday before it was due, and it was clear to me that you were working really hard to do this, and, you know, your statement at the time was what you've gotten on Friday was not the right thing. And, you know, I certainly, having looked at your zip file and everything that you pulled together to send to Federal Highways, I don't think they could ask for any more documentation. Certainly, this is a very thorough list and compilation of all these documents. And, you know, I certainly appreciate the work and the effort that got put into this to provide Federal Highways with what, honestly, they should have been doing and they should have been compiling. So, you know, I am not at all disputing it. It really seems like Federal Highways did not give clear instructions. They didn't give a guidance paper or anything that says, this is what we need from you. So I totally get that, but.
They even changed the day of
I know,
the last council meeting.
I cannot
Last
endorse that for a second. I think that's terrible procedure on their part and not fair, given that what the town was being asked to do was essentially, you know, start Federal Highway's job for them. It's ultimately their responsibility at the end of the day to complete this, and it has to be their decision. But having had the chance today to look over what, you know, Jean and Hans were working on, you know, this to me would not at all be in lieu of what you sent and what you worked so hard on, but I think it would be a helpful supplement. And I think we should go ahead and send it with the understanding that with all of this, it's Federal Highway's job to respond to comments and to come out with their final National Historic Preservation Act determination. Whatever we give them is in aid of them performing their job. It's not our job to make that finding. We already did what we did. We've documented, as you've done, what the comments were, whether the town responded to them in the historical trust proceedings, or whether these were issues that were not addressed at all, you know. So I would really like to suggest that this document be submitted as a supplement. Not in lieu of, but just in addition to, and with all of this material, you know, you've certainly given Federal Highways enough to make their determination, you know, this is just helping in a different way. You know, your matrix was very thorough in saying, you know, this issue, this letter, responded to, not responded to. This is the same type of, this is just taking it from a different angle, because this is more of a narrative in terms of grouping, you know, it's lumping versus splitting. So I really think that we should go ahead and send this with the caveat that with all of this, Federal Highways, you need to do your job, and whatever we've provided you, you can consider it, ignore it, whatever you're going to do, because that's your job now, but we've given you as much help as we can in terms of documenting the process that was undertaken, and, you know, certainly not, I mean, it is what it is at this point. The process is what it was what it was, and now Federal Highways has to consider, do they have enough information, and do they have to see the process and determine whether there was an adequate consideration of the issues. So I would really like to see this go in, just as a supplement, not as a replacement for anything that you've done.
I'd be happy to send it.
No, that's okay. This came to us. I will be happy to send it forward, but I'm going to make another point again. They told us that we were not to make responses. What this document does, that you've sent, that you worked with Jean, that you weren't supposed to be working with Jean on, because that's not where it was supposed to go, was that it's responding, it's the town's response to individual things. I made a promise to everybody in town that we are not writing responses. Even the former mayor had to hear that. They had to hear it actually from the Federal Highway Administration, who the former mayor also talked with. We were not writing responses, and that's why this didn't go in. I'll be happy to send it as a follow-up and say, Jeanette, the council feels very strongly that this should also be considered.
Well, I certainly hear what you're saying, Kaki, and I think that a fair reading of this document, you could ignore anything that looks like a response and focus on the parts that say, like with respect to this issue, the town did discuss alternatives as reflected on pages 16 to 19, 20 to 23, 24, 26. So I think this is helpful in just grouping the issues and saying, in the Historical Trust communications, where was that response found? So, they could put their blinkers on to say anything that kind of sort of looks new, they could, ignore that. And I think that reasonable minds could disagree about whether this is actually new responses. But what it does do is very clearly signpost, issue, the project will require the removal of trees. And, this is what we did. We did the special tree protection plan, and it's discussed on page 8 of the submittal. So I think it's helpful in
Actually,
signposting.
If we had followed the method that we were going to...
If she's asked you to send it to read, just,
Yeah.
there's something.
Right, and I was just going to say, that was Phil's method in the very beginning. We were going to document every single page where we would have things, but they actually didn't want all that. So I'm happy to send it, and I'll let
Well,
them know. I'm happy to send it.
I agree with you, we're at the 11th hour, and you've done all this work, and
I'll send it
we all
forward.
just want to get it over with.
Yeah, I do. Thank you.
Don't we all?
Can we move on? Because we got so much. Charlie, I know. If you can say it in 10 words or less. Sorry.
I agree with her.
Okay,
I oppose this whole project. I
and I'm
agree.
hoping that you can move
Because
on.
as soon as you send that, the consulting parties get another bite of the apple.
They don't,
and we
Charlie.
Hold it up for another year or two.
We don't want that, Charlie.
Send it.
Charlie, that's,
We'll, listen,
Charlie,
There's
that was
no
more than
sense.
10 words.
I covered this, I covered this as a professional journalist for a major publication for 10 years. I know this thing, and I know how to get around it. That's why we were able to hold this up now for 6 years.
Charlie,
We can hold it up for another couple of
We
years.
don't-
Send that stuff, and you open it up to us. Please do.
Charlie, thank you for that brief response. We'll send it forward, and also, I'm going to make a plea, once again. We have to work together, each of us and every one of us together, to get on the same page and move forward. I cannot hold this up any longer. We cannot keep tearing this town apart. Please consider that. Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda.
Waverly.
Take that, Andrea.
Okay, so an update here is that we made good progress. They're checking a few areas for leveling. There's some minor fixes that are needed.
This is for everybody, this is the Waverly sidewalk that runs along the tennis courts, which has been sloping towards the tennis courts.
They're putting down, I think it's okay. I think we're fine. They're putting down pressure-treated wood, bringing in dirt and backfill, and we know that we have some follow-up we need to do with the contractor, and that will be something George will be helping with tomorrow.
Yay.
And this is pressure treated wood as a retaining wall.
because,
On the slope side, so that it doesn't wash away from the sidewalk.
Yeah.
thank you, Andrea, yeah, and I think George was going to do one last quality check.
Yes.
Because we had concern about a couple of those concrete pavers being still slightly tilted, but understand that ADA had said anything that's like 2% or greater was in violation, and we were sitting at 4 to 7% on these concrete paver sidewalks along the tennis courts. We are 13. Thanks, Tom. So we are within, at least what I was told by the contractor last week, that he got down to 0.02 for the ones that I thought was still a little, but others are even. We saw the level applied. So if you haven't walked on them yet, feel free to walk on them, because it is nice to walk on some flat sidewalks.
Level.
Okay, what else do we have? I've
So
lost
question
my-
though, is that the retaining wall, is it going next to the sidewalk or under the sidewalk,
It's
or?
going to go next to the sidewalks.
Okay.
It's supposed to hold, they're going to backfill with dirt just to pack it in more.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to lay the pressure treated alongside it. I don't quite know if there will be dirt on the other side, slope hill or not. It probably wouldn't
Yeah.
make sense, but
Do they have an engineer looking at this? Because if you just put it in wood, it's just going to fall. I'm sorry to beat the dead horse with
Yeah,
this, but it's just like,
George is going to look at it.
is he an engineer?
He is
I
a
don't-
general contractor. He knows how to set the.
I've seen walls wash out from general contractors. It's just, I just ask that you look at these things holistically. It usually needs to go down, needs a dead man that goes into the hill that holds it in there. And the other thing I had suggested before is if you have a level sidewalk, first of all, it's supposed to pitch positive drainage, not to exceed 2%. ADA doesn't say anything. It has guidelines about how things are done for ADA, but there's a code requirement typically that you have a rail on something where there's more than a 1 and 2 slope down on the other side. So that's what I was suggesting before, is that whatever that wall is next to it raises up a little bit. So if somebody's walking with or in a wheelchair or riding a scooter or something like that, they can't hit that and fall off. And then usually the next thing that comes up with is a railing. So
Right. Well,
that's
maybe
why
we'll have that as another expense to
I think,
purchase.
yeah. Your other point before was that this is really to get it through the winter, which I think is a
Well,
great thing. But I
It's
think
to get
those
us
things should be the
through,
next
you know,
things.
whatever it takes until the
Yeah.
town's ready to come back with a sidewalk, a real sidewalk plan,
Yeah,
if we need to.
yeah. Could be like the start.
It is supposed to be
Yeah.
very long-lasting, but I wanted something immediate because we've already had people slipping and sliding
Yeah.
and tripping, and I've been one. The former town manager has been. There's been a couple of residents who've told me the same. And I said, we just can't go through another winter like this. Those
Yeah.
things are so badly tilted.
Yeah, I think it's great to do it for the winter. I was frustrated it wasn't done before.
Okay. So, okay, hopefully we can keep these brief. Phil, can you give us a update on traffic and parking?
In 30 seconds or less, what I would say is that we're looking at putting up a sign or two down on Weymouth, at the end of Weymouth, to help those people who don't have driveways, keep cars who are not supposed to be there from parking there. There's been some concern from a number of residents that there's too many cars down there, especially from people from Parkside, and the people from Parkside then make it more difficult for those who don't have driveways to be able to park even near their houses. So what we're looking at is trying to put up some signs down there as a way of hopefully deterring that. People from Parkside, of course, find it easier to be able to park there, and then they can drive off to where they need to go rather than having to drive all the way around. So
How about Rokeby?
I haven't done anything with the Rokeby yet.
I mean, you did.
Well, we
met
talked,
with your team. Did you talk about
yeah, we talked about that. That was the last time. Yep.
Phil, I got to ask a process question here. So with the whole process we went through to amend the ordinance and then delegate to the town manager the responsibility to enact regulations, I am not clear on how the ad hoc traffic and parking committee is playing into that process, because I don't think the committee has the authority on its own to say, put new signs here. I think the committee can come to Andrea and say, you know, we've evaluated this and we need you to consider going forward with
In
the
this case,
regulation.
in this
But-
case, it was Khaki and Jean.
Well, I know, but it has to be done through the regulatory process, this is, this is the thing that we have established as our new framework for going forward. So
Right.
I'm not saying this isn't like super useful evaluation and advice to feed into that process. It's just that, it's got to get written down because again, if you recall, with the process we established, we said that the council would be the backstop on, we would have the opportunity to review and then red flag any parking regulation, and the council has to retain the ultimate authority to review that. So we need to have a process set up where any of these recommendations are formalized through regulation, and then the council is notified of them. That's what we did when we redid the parking ordinance to establish that process.
Certainly, I can come up with something.
And the other question I was going to ask with respect to Weymouth, somebody brought up, and I don't recall who, that now we, as hopefully some point, have this enforcement MOU that we could consider like a residential parking sticker system, whether it's townwide or for, say, certain choke point areas like that. And I don't know if that's been discussed.
We've been discussing that. Right now, the thought was start with just putting up a sign to see if that's enough to cause people to do something, because the question became, we've kicked it around, I've talked to some residents about it too, and I mean, the problem becomes, well, you have to make sure that people have the stickers, and if somebody goes and visits, then you got to make sure that they've got a visiting sticker, because if they don't have a visiting sticker, then they could get, towed or whatever. So the first thought was, well, let's see if we can put up a sign, see if people just obey it.
Right, the difference there, I think, is that it's the difference of residential parking only versus a no parking. Unless we're going to go into the regulations and say that if you have we don't have this policy practice yet, but having a residential sticker, gives you a waiver to be able to park in a no parking area.
Yeah, it'd have to be residents.
And so where this comes back again with enforcement is, as long as we aren't putting out signage that is residential parking and time restricted parking, then the county, the Montgomery County Police can, in their patrolling, be able to ticket. And first it was going to be by education and warning any violators who are in no parking areas.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think what we're talking about then is if you do a residential sticker.
Well, we have to figure out some way to do it in a regulation, because with our speed limit signs, our stop signs, we have the right to put up traffic control signs, but this is a parking restriction. If we put up a sign saying, don't park here if you live in Parkside, we don't have a regulation to back it up.
Right.
We just put up a sign that it's, we need to have the force of law behind it. So.
When was the last time a speeding ticket was given out in town?
We're still in the process of making the star and the spurs for Andrea, so as soon as we get those fitted, we'll be ready to rock and roll.
We actually have been thinking about maybe having maybe somebody on each side of Strathmore where the star and the spangles. We'll see. It's by the county executive, who's delegated to the mayor, discretion of who the mayor would want to appoint. And of course, the logical one was Andrew, but it may not. We may need to look elsewhere. So
may need deputies.
We may need deputies of deputies.
George.
That's true too. Thanks. All right, so
They should discuss it with everybody first.
So moving on, thank you, Phil. We have update on town hall renovation. Stephen.
Yeah, so new roof was put on last week, and I think it spilled a little bit into the weekend. I think Kaki and Phil worked on some emergency issues with that. I wasn't aware exactly when it was going to be done. I know the former town manager had put it in place, but so it basically replaced all the asphalt shingles that are on top of this roof. Did patching on the back flat roof, because we just don't know whether that back roof would stay long-term, or if it would be changing. It doesn't make sense to spend a lot, and it made sense to put a new roof on this, at least hold it over so you don't get any damage in here that's more expensive than putting up a new roof. It's more expensive to fix what could come through the roof, so it's going to be a good holdover for us. And then I'm working on trying to put together a request for, I'm not sure if it would be an RFP or RFQ, but to try to get an assessment done of the outside of this building, somebody to come over here and spend a lot more time, figure out which of the siding's original, which is not. So instead of like scraping and painting siding that probably just needs to be, taken away and put in a dumpster, let's figure out what it could be and then put in something that's more permanent. I think a fair amount of the historic building has replacement siding on it, so I want to just get that confirmed. And also, when you take off the siding, there could be a potential to put insulation in it. This building's not insulated, so I'm trying to figure out best way to ask for that assessment and get it done. So we kind of do it smartly once instead of just painting it and assuming that solves all the problems. So that's the two things.
One of the things I had been advocating is, again, it's because we're looking at some major renovation to this building, but because of the great disrepair from the outside, from the curb, if there was a way to do more of a cosmetic fix, because it's going to take us a few years to get to the renovation. This was something I thought that George actually might be able to do in coordination with you, if we're scraping and replacing some of the wood shingles. But, I'm just kind of curious about, we need to discuss the RFP and the RFQ a little bit further about what your intent is, because if this is something he can do, we don't have to go out for bids.
This would be for an architectural assessment of a historic architect to look at things, and also somebody who's really skilled with environmental, to talk about different, I've done it, but it's been 5-6 years, so I'm not as up to date, but some of the Montgomery County Parks buildings have done that, where they've taken off the siding, put the insulation on in from the outside, and then put the siding back on. So it's more that kind of thing. It's not a contracting thing, but your point as well, taking on cosmetic damage, because I guess what I'm trying to focus on is find an assessment for, say, like that side of the building and that side of the building, which we know we're not going to change, and then figure out something that's more permanent for those. But the other sides that could potentially change, like the north side and the back side, then we could do, George have working on the cosmetic damage, which was something I talked about with the former town manager last week.
We kind of need the front for cosmetic, for some quick painting. We also may be changing the front portion of the bell part of the tower, I thought, where the bathrooms are. I thought
We
that was
could,
the
but I
end of
think that could be at least 2 years out. So I think that
Right.
would be the cosmetic bucket. Like the front that's outside of those windows, I think that could be the permanent bucket, because we could be
You don't
potentially
really
taking that out, no, we won't change that. And you could be potentially taking off the siding that's below the scallop siding and then replace it and put
I'd
insulation in.
like to get George involved in that discussion too. Okay?
I would just like to ask, if, to keep in mind that people make reservations to use town hall as much as a year in advance. And so in your planning, to keep in mind, to keep it in the loop so that I don't have to then cancel bat mitzvah, bar mitzvah that's planned here in advance, because there's going to be some renovation that's taking place, whether it's cosmetic on the outside of the hall or actual construction.
Yeah. Yeah, we definitely have to coordinate that, and that would be when it goes into an action bucket for George or our contractor to work on it. We would have to get with you on that, make sure that matches up. But what I'm talking about with RFQ is more of architectural and the planning of what the final could be, not just painting. Yeah,
I get that. That's very good.
what the work should be, not
Right.
doing it.
Right, got it, great. Okay, thanks, Stephen. Now we've got Jane Arboretum.
Yeah, no haiku this week. Sorry, that was, the pinnacle of brevity. The Arboretum Committee and the Comprehensive Arboretum Plan news is that our consultant finished the field work for the tree inventory last Friday, although there's going to have to be a review and quality control process on that before we call it finished. And then NRD also owes us the first draft of the comprehensive tree plan later this month or early in January. So that's something that we hope to take up at the next Arboretum Committee meeting. I will also add that our new member, Andrew Fiddler, joined us for our last Arboretum Committee meeting, so we're very happy to have him on board. Going forward, Chris Keller and I had the opportunity to sit down with Jean Swearingen last week. Part of what we're going to have to do with the comprehensive arboretum plan is there needs to be within that plan a discussion of the legal framework applicable to how trees get managed in Garrett Park. And we're certainly going to be looking for input from our consultants on that. What are the best practices they've seen from other municipalities or jurisdictions? One thing that we had identified is that, and that Gene said that he would send out an email, is places like the town of Somerset have their own tree regulations. So there's, a body of knowledge out there to draw from to consider whether our existing ordinances are sufficient.
Washington Grove is a big
And
one.
Washington Grove, yes, other ones like that. So what we need to be doing in tandem with moving the comprehensive arboretum plan forward in draft is reevaluating, what the final legal framework to be reflected in that plan should be. And one proposal that we're considering is whether we should model this after the redo of the parking ordinance we did, where we took the specifics out of the ordinances and put in sort of general direction and delegation to the town manager to come up with regulations. Now, how that would fit in with the comprehensive arboretum plan, which is the vision statement, the directives, the inventory, the management principles moving forward, we would have to work out as that shapes up. But, most immediately with the removal of the tulip poplar at 11309 Kenilworth, it became very clear that, notwithstanding that the ordinances require council approval of removal of each and every tree, that's just not practical on a daily basis. Sometimes trees have to be taken down on an emergency basis, and you just can't wait for the next council meeting to get that done, or else you have to, call a meeting, kind of a pain in the butt. So the practice has essentially been, even if not 100% lawful, that, Gene has been making these decisions, but he's always sort of felt uncomfortable because am I supposed to be making them? And he has looped in the Arboretum Committee, the chair, Phil Normandy, our arborist, but, it really became clear to us, especially this last time around, that we need to find a better way of running this railroad that's more flexible than having the council have to take like a vote on each and every tree. So, looking to sources such as other municipalities' regulations and getting input from our consultant, and with any luck, maybe day after tomorrow when Andrea's totally got the job down pat, scheduling a sit down. We'd like to start moving that process forward. And, Chris Keller is, willing to be very involved in that. He has long experience in this town, as everyone knows, both on the political side and from the committees, and he's an attorney. Michael Spector, who is the chair of the Arboretum Committee and has been deeply involved in it for many years, is also an attorney. And I'm an attorney, so I think we can figure out, reasonable proposals. We'll probably come up with, since we're 3 attorneys, at least 4 proposals. But, yeah, so that's our plan, is that it really is time and timely with the comprehensive arboretum plan to come up with a better way to figure out, and more flexible, to figure out how to get these things done.
Right, we look forward to that.
So that's my non-haiku.
Thank you,
Same time
Jane.
last week.
Update on street repaving, Hans.
Okay, very quickly. Essentially, what we found is that we had thought that we had about $200,000 to spend this year on repairs, and it looks increasingly like it'll be more like $150,000. So we have a list of parts of Kenilworth, parts of Rokeby, parts of Claremont scheduled to be done. And what we're going to have to do is come up with some cost estimates based on the streets, those specific streets, and then see how much the total estimate is, and if we can't afford it, then start taking some pieces of it out. And so I need to meet with our engineer and work up a program to do that.
Okay, we're still shooting for early spring to start that, so that'd be great.
And just, we're following the capital improvement plan? Like, that sort of specifies the schedule of which street segment is up for repaving
The
when?
one exception to that is they had recommended Shelley Court, and when we walked it, Stephen and I looked at I in the past had talked to the engineer and say, in the case of Shelley Court in Cambria, where there's a big turnaround at the end of the street, maybe making that, maybe not a rain garden, but some kind of a water runoff management space. And so we asked the engineer to do some core samples there to see if the subsurface even allows for that. And if it does, then we might ask him for an idea. If it doesn't, then we'll put that back on the list for paving. But it doesn't make any sense to pave it and then next year tear it apart. So that's why we moved Shelley Court back down the list by a year.
And so Cambria is also slated for 2020, so it'd probably be the same thing. And what a great idea to have them together. I mean, one might be, if you come up with a solution for both, there's,
It's a cool idea. I don't know whether the capacity is there
yeah.
or the space.
We'll have to,
Yeah.
we definitely need to think of that, Hans, for the formulation of the 2020 budget. Because I think some of the cost estimates that are in that capital improvement plan are low. So
I'm willing to take more money.
we're gonna, we have to, that's part of
No,
this.
you're completely right. I mean, and the reality is, as we look at stormwater management, we're talking about millions of dollars, not hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we're going to have to get some kind of help.
Yeah.
All right, just a quick question. Was Oxford on that list of any of the upcoming
Oxford was on the list for the end of Oxford down by Weymouth, where it's really in bad shape. But because of the fact that we have curbing work to do there, it doesn't make any sense to do that, to pave it before you do that.
That's tied into the SRTS.
Yeah, I would just like to ask the town to consider that whenever it does any kind of road work on Oxford, if there's any way that they can have some kind of, I don't know, variegated surface to allow for water runoff so it doesn't become a sheet of ice in the wintertime.
Is this in front of Shelley Court?
It's at various segments on Oxford. There's sheets of ice from where Claremont, the section of Claremont that runs from Oxford towards Parkside. At that intersection, there's a sheet of ice there from the Chow's house. There's also another sheet of ice that forms where the Claremont section that runs from Strathmore to Oxford. The water, there's like a sewer that's on Claremont, and then the next sewer is on Shelley. So the water runs down Claremont and freezes on Oxford at Shelley. Then there's another section up at the top of Oxford where the hill crests at Keswick, just past Keswick towards Weymouth. There's usually a block of ice that goes all the way across. And then again on the end of Oxford where it dips down to Weymouth, there is usually another sheet of ice there. So that, that's like 4 different sections on Oxford. I know that I've spoken with you in the past about sewers and drains, and that is cost prohibitive. But if there's some other way that we can, even if it's just doing some grooving in the pavement or some kind of textured surface so that there can at least be some elevated sections, we're trying to go up Oxford Street, up that hill in the wintertime. When it snows, it's almost impossible to get out of that section of town because it's uphill in 3 directions. You cannot exit Garrett Park without having to go uphill.
I've made a note, and I'll talk to John Strong to see if he can come down and walk it with me and come up, see if he has any ideas.
Yeah, something. Maybe there's some innovative solution.
We may need to look at that for the Rokeby Hill too, because that's what happens. We get ice and people can't get up there. That's why we end up opening the swing gate.
So two things. One is there's an area there, actually where I park on Cambria, which needs some work too. I think, and if John Strong hasn't looked at it, it's right there in Cambria and Raleigh, right underneath the tree. Yeah, and it's all that alligator cracking. It's been getting worse over the years.
We're starting to sink.
It's starting to sink, yeah, it's starting to sink there. There was a similar thing that had occurred on the other side of Raleigh, closer to, more in front of the park there, and they went and did a really deep patch on that where they dug down quite a bit, and that solved it. I haven't seen that one come back in a long time. And the last thing is, for the stormwater management piece, is that going to be something that would be above ground or something that would take away space from that, from the turnaround area down there?
Don't know.
Okay.
We just looked at this and say, you know, if we just open up this paved area and put the water absorption facility in the middle of it, which you couldn't, well, you might be able to drive on it, I don't know what the ideas are, but make that pervious, then it might help a little bit.
Okay, because it'd be the driving on it.
Or, you know, if you really want to look far in the future, put a huge storage tank in there, which is a holding tank, where you could then release it over time as opposed to having it all run off at once.
Right, that might be easier.
It's more logical, but by far the more expensive.
Oh, yeah. And the other thing is, I'm sure they'll call them misutility, but there are several gas lines that I know, because I've seen them dig the area up right in the middle of that circle, so.
Good planning.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Hans. Next is town manager's report. Andrea?
Yes, okay, the first thing before I forget is that my email is, it's all set up, and it's managerandrea@garrettparkmd.gov, so everybody start sending emails.
Is the mayor and town council address set up to redirect to include Andrea, or do we know?
I have asked for it. I haven't double checked, because that's the same question for Dan. If his name is in this distribution list, we haven't updated the website pages that have that, so it's.
Okay, so probably better just to do individual.
Yeah, I
for now.
have been, just in case, so.
And Dan's the setup too, yes.
Dan,
So-
yeah, Dan, do you, council,
Yes.
Council Dan? Dan, you want to send us, state your email, please?
Council Dan.
Aaron, your,
MD.
yeah.
Captain Dan, Forrest Gump.
Council Doctor Dan?
The rest of my report is pretty straightforward. There's a memo, so the capital and operating budgets are at expected levels. The total revenues and expenses are within projections. The follow-up from the November meeting, there was a question about the professional fees line item. That explanation is in the report, but wanted to see if anybody had any additional questions.
So I was just not, so this is the amount that's over anticipated budget at this point in the.
No, that's you today.
Right, I understand that, but the bottom line says total of expenses not budgeted 15,000, which reflects the sum of these three numbers. I guess the question I had was, you know, the delta between what we've actually spent, you know, subtracting out this $15,000, what was the stuff that what did we spend it on that we did anticipate spending it on? What's that?
That's a $10,000 gap of unexplained expenses.
Well, I'm not even sure, well, I mean,
It is 10,000, I calculated it.
oh, well, okay, I was just gonna ask.
And that's doing a straight line projection, saying that if you assume that the monthly cost is about the same.
Okay, I have no idea what you're saying.
Snapshot of general ledger. You know what I mean? Just keep everybody a list of all the expenses, and then if people have questions, I answer them.
Okay,
Tiny, tiny picky little part in reviewing the budget. Capital is misspelled 3 times on the,
there's a lot
Capital.
of things that have to be fixed on this budget
okay,
report.
just saying. For the mid-year adjustment, let's
Thank you.
get that.
It's not just that, there's other labeling that's wrong and
All right.
arithmetic.
I'm sure there is, but the
numbers
spelling,
that aren't-
spelling jumped out at me.
Thank you for seeing that one. Okay, if we have nothing else further, we are adjourned